Welcome to the Canadian Nurses Association Perspectives on Cannabis video series. My name is Sarah Flogan, project lead with the Canadian Nurses Association Substance Use and Addiction Program. In this video, you will meet Heath. Heath experienced cannabis-induced psychosis as a teenager and shares details of the experience of psychosis and hospitalization.
One of the most effective and meaningful relationships I had in recovery was with my addictions counselor, who was asking me things. What do you want? Like, how do you feel about your drug use? Like, what do you want to do? Another component of his approach was education that was really effective, because it wasn't education with the goal of like scaring me or changing my behavior. He explained like the continuum of addiction and like how that works and how it's like the initiation of substance non-use and then the initiation of use and then how use escalates and how once you start using, you never go back to the point where you had never used drugs, but you always you can pull it back, but there's always the chance that it might go forward, and that like addiction and substance use is like, it's a lifelong thing to manage now that you've started using drugs, and especially now that you've experienced cannabis use disorder, which people always laugh like as if it's cannabis, like how do you get addicted to cannabis? My name's Heath. I am a person with lived experience of mental illness and substance use. I work in drug policy reform activism on campuses with students through Canadian Students for Sensible Drug Policy. I sit on a number of advisory committees around cannabis and mental health. My kind of main culminating experience of substance use and mental illness was when I was 17. I had an incident of early adolescent psychosis in between grades 11 and 12. I had been using cannabis for probably 3 years. I think I probably first started using cannabis when I was 14 and took a liking to it quite quickly and would use it quite regularly, more than my peers, but I kind of assumed that like everyone was using weed the way I was, which is not the case. I was using a lot of weed, arguably too much weed, for my age and for my risk profile. I had already had experiences of mental illness as early as like 11, 12, struggling with depression and anxiety. There was a lot of pressure on me to make a lot of big decisions about, you know, my career and my identity and like who I was going to be and what I was going to do, which was stressful. And I realized, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'm doing. And it spiraled pretty quickly with a lot of like internal reflection, but then with a little bit of disorganization. I had one moment that was particularly jarring where I kind of was like, when's the last time I ate? And then I realized that like I hadn't eaten in like a couple days, and I just somehow went without noticing that. There was also the visual hallucinations where I would look at people and they didn't look like people normally look like. Their faces would be a little distorted. I was like, this is scary. I don't know what's going on, and no one understands what I'm talking about. So terribly isolating. Something that would be helpful for healthcare practitioners to know from the perspective of someone receiving care is that it's more valuable to offer comfort than to exert control over patients. I received a bit of like mixed messaging once I was in a hospital. Like when I arrived to the hospital, I had like my backpack with some art supplies. And at first the nurse that admitted me was like, oh yeah, that's fine. Like you can keep that with you. But then a couple hours later, the same nurse was like, why do you have that? You shouldn't have that. You shouldn't have sharps and pencils. I mean, I was already like not having a good grasp on reality, and then having these like puzzles that were missing pieces and had pieces of other puzzles mixed in. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's what like a mentally ill person needs, is to try and put together a puzzle that is not going to come together in the end at all. I think it's kind of comparable to something like having, you know, like a broken leg, whereas like, or like you break your ankle and then you get treatment and it heals, but then it's something that you're kind of aware of for the rest of your life. The way that I look at it is kind of like integrating the experience, because I didn't want to just like shove it aside and like forget that it happened. It was an important introspective experience that was very challenging, but also gave me a lot of insight into my life and what I was doing with it. Some of the most hopeful messages that I heard at that time were like, it's not your fault. Discussions about like neuroplasticity, you know, like it's not like irreversibly damaged. Like all hope is not lost.